Hey everybody, this is Blaine from Next Level Timing, and today we're going to do a getting started video of a custom race setup. So let's get into it. All right, again, we're on our dashboard. We've got our timing device set up. Um, yeah, and so we're going to do a race setup here, and let's go over each of these options. So first, we can punch in whatever race name we want. It can have the date in it. We'll save out the date. So if you don't want the date in there, we'll put a timestamp on each race for you. And then yeah, we can set up a track layout. So you can set up the track layout from either in the race setup screen or on this track layouts over here, but we don't have any yet. So we need to set up a new one if we want one. It's not a requirement, but we can just set up a test track, and you can name it whatever you want. Maybe it's the month that you set up the track in. Maybe it's a particular type of layout. Maybe you have them written down. You've got them well organized, and you have them numbered. Name it whatever you want, as long as you remember the name. Let's see. So we can also upload an image for this track. So if we come into here, I've got a few different track images that I could use. Sometimes they can be of an invalid photo type. So you'll want to make sure that they're in JPEG format. So here's a valid format. And here's an example of what that track might look like. I think some of these other videos or images are also JPEG. So you can just take a picture of your track if you want and upload that. Yeah, so let's save that. So this will help you remember what the track layout looked like. Some tracks aren't so conveniently where you can snap them together like this. This is some RCP track, and you'll never be able to rebuild this, but some you'll be able to rebuild. And so you'll want to save an image of what that looks like. Here's the minimum lap time. Or I should say that if you aren't using this track and you're doing this race and you don't want to track anymore, you can just click this little X right here and the track will go away. And just to reassign that, you'll notice that we're on the save track layouts now, and we can just reselect this test track here. Pretty convenient. Yeah, so we have a minimum lap time. So if your track is, say, 12-second track, for your fast lap, maybe consider bumping this up to like 10 seconds so you don't accidentally get a misread halfway through the race from somebody, you know how timing bars can be. Essentially, if you have a timing bar set up down the straight or something and you have some corners around it, sometimes that little overlap right there can cause some issues. So your minimum lap time kind of helps adjust for some of the inconsistencies produced by your timing equipment. And it will interrupt the race, basically saying invalid lap. It'll throw out the lap automatically for you. Finally, we have this race format. And you can configure this by clicking on either side of this. And so you can click on this or the arrow. Apologies, that was a little bit intense. And again, we don't have any saved yet, so we're going to create a custom race format. And so here we can select the mode. You have a standard race or practice. In practice, each lap time is announced. And it's just a way to kind of indicate that it is a practice mode. And in standard race, the virtual director does not announce each lap time or how you're doing your streak laps. We wanted to tone that down so you could focus on the race. Heads up versus staggered. Heads up starts all the racers' clocks at the same time. So at the beginning of the race, boop, everybody's clocks start at the same time. Sometimes you might want to run staggered though. Staggered might help you start the race more cleanly. So sometimes people will start the staggered, the tone will sound, and they'll just call out each person's name. And it kind of spreads out the racers so there's not a big wreck at the beginning of the race. Kind of helpful there. We have several different types of duration you can apply to your race. So essentially, you can have a time limit. And so down here, your race could just be affected by the time. Lap limit, so you can have just a number of laps here. You can have time and lap limits, which is kind of silly, but it's possible. So if either one happens first, basically that's the indicator for the end of the race. So you can set the number of seconds here, and you can set the lap limits to 8 or something. Say you might use this like, hey, you got 5 minutes to complete 7 laps, and if you don't do it by then, it's you've not completed the race or something. That's an option. And finally, we've got endless, which is basically an infinite length. We use this per practice. Practice is a great place to use a duration of endless. The race is only ended when you manually click stop race. So we're just going to do a simple time limit, and we'll set it to 1 minute long. Here's some streak options, and it's kind of helpful to read this little text. But essentially, the streak is announced at 5 laps. You can start your streaks early, but essentially it will be announced at the 5-lap streaks. And what that means is 5 consecutive laps within plus or minus 10% of the previous lap's time. So you can get progressively slower or faster during that consistency streak. But what's important there is staying within that zone from lap to lap. And so you're just maintaining that consistency between the laps. And if you decrease this, say if you're racing different types of cars, if you decrease this, you might want to make it more challenging or put it within range of whatever you're racing. Say, for instance, you're racing slot cars. You might need a much smaller tolerance for what your streak looks like. I'm not sure. You can also adjust this up, and when you move it up, it'll make it easier to get into the streak. Here you can save this as a race. So we've made this custom race format, and we could either hit continue or we could save it as a new race format. So we're going to hit save, and we will call this the test race format and save here. Again, you can click this little X. It will just turn it back into a custom race, and it won't use that custom race format anymore, but you can reselect that race format. And if you notice, nothing really changes here, and that's because we still need all these values. But you can come back up in here and set up a very custom race. So if you wanted to just quickly change this to 3 minutes and not change any other settings, we can go to continue, and this will be considered a custom. So unless you resave that, it will not, you can't change that. And we'll get into modifying a track layout in another video. So that's the main race setup, and we'll talk about participants for a moment. In the future, we'll add basically an option to not auto-detect race participants, but for now, all race participants are tracked at the very beginning of the race. So if the system sees a new transponder, it will add them as a race participant to that race. And so you can't actually disable that, but I did want to cover that. And finally, I have covered this. If you enable this demo, a bunch of basically robots or, the system will generate a bunch of data for you. You should only run this when you're actually like trying to test out the system, just see if the sound is right or something like that, and you don't have a bunch of racers out already and you're just trying to get everything set up. So mostly you don't need to play with that. And at this point, you can just start the race and you'll be off. And I'm just going to cancel this race, kind of showing you off another feature. You can cancel the races. You can't delete these races, but if we come into here, you can see we have our race. We can re-access these races. So all our previous races, even the very first one from the first video, we can come in here and relook at all these statistics. And we can also go online and look at all these races as well. So if we went over to our test community, we came over to races, we can see that race was there. And so, yeah, that's about it for this video. That's how to set up a custom race. We'll get into doing track layouts and modifications of race formats in another video. Thanks.